I think most people remember where they were on 9/11.
Somebody opened the door in the middle of our conference group and said, "Hey, turn on the TVs now."
And I went into our headquarters building and they had CNN on in the conference room. And I walked in and everybody was just ash-faced and shocked.
An airplane flying due south has crashed into the upper level of the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
We thought it was just a small biplane or something like that.
I pictured a little Cessna tail, like a two-seater, sitting out of a window.
I think we all thought it was an accident at first.
You know, what could it be? Something happened to the pilot? Was there a mechanical issue?
I thought, well, this is a movie, or, you know, they're reviewing, so it didn't seem real until I changed the channel and saw it was on every channel.
In the back of the live feed, you see an airplane coming and hitting the back of the building.
And that is the only building
it's exploding right now, Tommy. We're seeing another
Apparently
plane.
that was another plane.
Obviously, it was not a light aircraft, and obviously, it was not a freak accident.
Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Then second, I was like, we're actually, we're under attack.
We were at Fort Dix, which was not far from New York City. And the trainers stopped training and pulled us into the bleachers out in the woods and told us that the United States had just been attacked.
So here we were talking about asymmetric warfare, and here we were being attacked very asymmetrically, something no one had ever really imagined before.
I remember watching people jump from those buildings, and I got really sad and sick by that. I mean, just think about that could have been anybody that I knew or loved or cared for having to be in that building.
As time ticked by, you watched the flames and the smoke and the chaos. It was heart-wrenching to think the loss of life, the things that had happened right here on our soil that we were unable to prevent at the time.
On the day, I happened to be leading 15 colonels from the Joint Staff on a trip to London, England. So I got into a cab, famous London black cab. The cabbie turned around and said, "Are you Yanks?" And I said, "We are." And he said, "I'm terribly sorry."
I want you to take a look at what's happening right now. That is a live picture.
As World Trade Center 2 has just collapsed. That's the second tower to collapse.
You're sitting there thinking about your family that's up in New York. I have a sister who works in the New York Medical Examiner's Office. I had a brother who worked in the area. You know, are they okay? Is family okay? Are friends okay?
Crazy. Nobody really knew what to think.
There was this sense of fear, of panic, not knowing, you know, is this done? Is there more?
We did get word that there was an additional aircraft that was inbound to D.C. that wasn't in contact with air traffic control.
We all kind of looked at each other and said, we're probably next. I actually do not remember the sound.
One of the students' cell phone went off and said that the Pentagon had been hit.
Next thing I know, I'm on the floor, but I was a good 10 feet, and I do not remember being blown into the wall. I do remember when I got up, and I'm looking at the fire coming in the window. The smell, the smoke, yes, I remember.
I was shocked at my own reaction to see this building with this horrendous wound that was inflicted onto the structure itself.
My father was a Pentagon police officer, but he wasn't working that day. I could see the hurt in his eyes.
Where the plane went in was the helipad side of the Pentagon. What I did not know, and this was the critical piece of information, was that my husband Dave's new office space he had just moved into after a renovation was actually on the right-hand side of the helipad. It was surreal. It was, you know, like watching a movie that I had to tell the kids that their dad was never coming home.
So it was a horrible day, a tragic day.
Emotion on all levels, the anger, frustration, sadness, all of that on a personal level.
The rest of the day was a blur, and there's all the rumors going around about what's happening. and how many planes were being hijacked. And then, of course, Flight 93 occurred in Pennsylvania.
We were talking about, oh, there might have been car bombs outside the State Department, or, we heard this, we heard that. And so everyone was kind of on edge.
Is this it? There were several attacks, and we weren't sure if they were done yet. Everything that happened for the next couple days, weeks, months, could this be another terrorist attack? Or, because anything was possible now that we had seen planes crash into towers.
Seeing the aftermath, it was so heartbreaking for me because I have such a drive to help wherever possible, and there was nothing I could do.
We were dealing with the loss of friends, the loss of capacity, and the shock of being attacked unprovoked.
None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom.
We as a nation, at the highest levels of the nation, were shocked. We were surprised. When the second plane hit, that's when I turned to my boss and went, oh man, we're at war.
War is coming. There's going to be a war. This is something different. This is different from all the other military conflicts that we had lived through to that point.
Nobody would dare to fight us toe-to-toe because they saw what happened to Saddam Hussein in Desert Storm. They're going to attack us other ways. And this was, again, it was a reminder that just because we're the biggest and the best doesn't mean we're invulnerable.
But you're thinking, man, what's the impact of going to war? Who did this? What caused this? What are the options?
We just were in a constant planning mode. We were in constant readiness. We weren't allowed to go very far from base. No one was getting out of the Marine Corps. And we just had a totally locked-on mindset.
We knew that as Patriot missile guys, we were going to be called on very shortly.
We received a planning order that afternoon, a top secret planning order that said begin planning operations, potential combat operations against 5 different countries.
We have to be prepared to give our National Command Authority and our President options that they want to deliver.
Here we are getting ready to plan going to war in a very short period of time. So for the first almost 20 plus days, it was utter chaos. You're not sleeping. 10, 12, 14, 15, 16-hour days, go sleep for a couple hours, come back in and pick it up again. And it was just non-stop work.
We came to be aware that the old concept of an adversary is no longer limited to nation states, but instead to an unseen enemy out there.
This is not just something that's in our history book. This is real. These aren't just numbers. We have 184 people who lost their lives at the Pentagon. That includes the 125 in the Pentagon and the 59 on the airplane. And each one of those people have a bench located at the Pentagon Memorial. There's a name on each of those benches that has a whole story. That person has family, has friends, has just countless people who were impacted by their death.
It's hard for us to remember what it was even like at this point, pre-September 11th.
You're a 16-year-old kid, you don't, life is pretty easy for the most part, especially when you're living in the United States. It's pretty stable.
And then 9/11 happens and you think, well, I don't know if I want to go into that world. What is that world now? Because for the entire duration that you're planning this future, it did not include 9/11 and these egregious acts of terrorism.
I don't know that I knew what that change was at the time. I probably still don't, but definitely I think it changed from that point on. Changed the world.
I think the whole nation kind of woke up going, that's why you have a nation's military, and we need to support them.
When they say thank you for your service, I'm looking in the eyes of the person that I do what I do for, and it all stemmed from 9/11 and wanting to protect these people.
The world has changed. And whatever you thought your career, however long or short that was going to be in the Army, it was going to be different and consumed with this for as long as it takes. And this was going to be a long war. but that we had to have the resolve to see it through and defend our principles and what makes us great, because that's what was under attack, in my view, that day.
There was a bit of fear instilled in America, but encouragement by many Americans not to take fear, not to change our lifestyle, that terrorists would not change who we are as Americans and our love for liberty and justice and the pursuit of happiness as guaranteed by the Founding Fathers and the founding documents.
Our Constitution is just not words. Your Constitution builds a trust with all the citizens of it because of its actions it has. And when someone has struck you in trying to change your way of life, our role is to protect them against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We are working very hard to, one, find out who was responsible, two, what our options were, and then three, present those to the National Security Council and then the President. We quickly did it within 2 weeks or so, had an approvals aspect to then take out the sanctuary that Osama bin Laden and his folks had in Afghanistan.
We had offered the Taliban the opportunity to turn him over, and the Taliban said no, and we said that as long as you harbor our enemy, then you're our enemy, and we went after them as well.
The war in Afghanistan was approved, and then we began our campaign.
The fact that Afghanistan's a landlocked country, one of the things you had to do early on was look at this, go, oh my God, how do we get forces in there? It was definitely a challenge working through the logistics piece of that. We found ways to do it. The best was to depend upon the indigenous population to do most of the fighting versus putting in a large force. That's one thing we didn't want to do, is put in a large army presence in there, because the ability to supply that up front without having a chance to develop the infrastructure. So using the SOF, using the indigenous force worked very well. And as a result of that, the Taliban collapsed very quickly, which enabled us to then do a better job of assessing the infrastructure within the country.
We really put a lot of effort to try to, find bin Laden and capture him. Obviously we missed, even though we thought we killed him 5 or 6 times, but in the end state we finally have put him to his peace.
For over 2 decades, bin Laden has been al-Qaeda's leader and symbol. The death of bin Laden marks the most significant achievement to date in our nation's effort to defeat al-Qaeda.
Afghanistan, we went in to go after a group who had struck us. In Iraq, there was no group that had struck us, and we went in there to preempt a potential strike.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
It was clear that something had to be done with Saddam Hussein, whether 9/11 happened or not. The sanctions were not really working. He still remained a threat. We believed then that he had weapons of mass destruction, that he was seeking to get these to use on us in Israel.
A lot of people say, oh, well, there was no WMD, it was just adventurism. What I like to remind people about is that we had seen 9/11. We had seen an airliner go down in New York that we weren't sure what happened. We had seen anthrax shipped into the postal system here in D.C. We had seen the sniper at the gas stations in Virginia. There was a palpable fear about, man, what is going on here? And the Homeland Security requirement to secure the homeland because there are threats that are out there.
You can debate the politics of why or when or if we should have gone in, but there's no doubt that we were able, when we went to Iraq, to stop some pretty bad things from happening. So you have to kind of balance it with the political discussion about why we were in Iraq, which we could debate all day.
There were those in the Pentagon who believed that we could do a very high technical, low soldier, sailor, airman, marine kind of combat, achieve our objectives of removing Saddam Hussein and withdraw. After several days of what's been labeled shock and awe, what I would say were joint use of fires, we began the ground invasion.
United States military forces captured Saddam Hussein alive, and now the former dictator of Iraq will face the justice he denied to millions.
Everybody thought, well, this war's over. This is going to be quick. And it's just been that it was this slow evolution where we realized, year after year, and as forces kept going, that it wasn't going to be quick. It was going to be this long, hard slog.
The nature of the war evolved into a counterinsurgency type operation.
In Afghanistan, by the time we finally caught Osama bin Laden, we now had in place a full-blown insurgency in which the Taliban and other criminal narco elements like the Hekmatyar and others who were trying to defeat the government we were supporting and trying to put Afghanistan back to where it was. In Iraq, because of the splits that developed between the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds, we had a challenge dealing with the groups who were looking at fighting the government we were helping them build.
We weren't fighting conventional military formations. In Iraq, we were fighting them for about 3 weeks until they disappeared. So the enemies get mixed into the population because they are the population. And that's really the hardest part and the core of counterinsurgency is you want to separate the insurgents from the population.
It was a challenge because you didn't know necessarily who the enemy was or where they were. Probably more important, where they were. Sometimes you walk around until you hear something explode or something happens, and you kind of have to just react to whatever contact is going on.
The insurgency doesn't stop at the gate. They're in the units as well, and so that made it a challenge because you're trying to build trust and live with these folks and go out on combat operations, but you always know that some of them could be Taliban sympathizers, etc.
And that's part of the problem, is we don't know who the enemy actually is. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
To look back on it now, 17 years later, it's hard to fathom that we're not totally gone from Iraq at this point.
I think it was difficult for us to be able to understand the bigger picture.
We worked long days, they're hot, we were constantly under attack. The best thing we could do was occupy ourselves focusing on the mission. Here's what we're going to do today.
That very first time when we sat in Jordan with the Patriot Force, I knew what it was all about. And by the time I was done with my third deployment, I had no idea.
Watching the death toll rise and being so sad for the families and the Marines and the soldiers and sailors and folks who had lost loved ones and friends over there.
We never sent anybody home without doing a formal ceremony. Sorry if I'm getting choked up with this. I didn't know the individuals, but to see 6 flag-draped caskets being ceremoniously conveyed to put in the back of the C-130 to go home, those are my first 24 hours of being in Iraq. So that's a wake-up call.
A fundamental assumption I think we skated right over, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, was after the heavy fighting, what comes next? Both places we went to, those were failed or failing countries. There was no effective governance system, but we were there. So again, we're thinking we're the victors, when actually day by day, we became more of the occupiers.
So we want to impose what we have today on many nations right away, and we forget from our own history that it took us a couple of 100 years to get to the point where we are, and therefore, how do we build democracy? Is that what we should be building, or should we be building participatory governance? And I think that's what we finally came back to, some sort of participatory governance in which people's rights are respected, and over time, they learn how to participate in a democratic process.
You always hope that the success stays and people would understand the democratic principles and the betterment of all that, but at the same time you have a sense of realization that we can only control so much.
It's probably like the closest ones you could look at and say that we have some degree of clarity, Japan and Germany. And we still have people there over 70 years later, and not against them, it's with them. But those are successful outcomes. It's way too early to say we had a successful outcome in Iraq or Afghanistan.
I think it's important that every American understands that this is not something that is going to be won. This is not something that has a finite date on it. It could potentially go on in perpetuity because it's an ideology.
And the American people have to have patience about how long it takes us to take a country like Afghanistan, which is like America probably in the 1850s, and help it emerge as a strong regional country under their own control. The United States does not need to control them. It takes care of their people in an equal way and helps them be a good member in the League of Nations.
It's been so long now that we've been in conflict in that area, it's easy to get complacent. The civilian population probably has. It's not as important as it once was, you know.
I sometimes wonder how many people remember 9/11 in a real heartfelt sense. We've got soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines overseas fighting still. Politics continues, business continues, the American way of life continues because we've taken the fight to the enemy away from our shores.
They're not feeling the impact of what's going on overseas here at home, and I think that's causing more of a disconnect. I don't know that it's a positive thing for our country, for the average American, to not be informed about what's going on the global war on terror.
I know, of course, you watch TV and you see a lot of different opinions about the war on terror and the reasons and what we can or can't accomplish. But from a layperson's perspective and somebody who's actually been personally impacted by terrorism, I have the utmost respect for anybody in the military who chooses to do their part to try to fight the evils in our world.
No matter what you feel about why we went somewhere, it is important to know that our military members volunteered, stood up with great hardship to their families, to their personal safety, etc. And that's something that not everybody's willing to do.
I love knowing that I am one of the few. I love knowing that I'm doing something for the greater good.
Serving gives me strength to find other Virginians and just this legacy of service that our state has. And of course, coming home to Virginia and seeing the seasons and being home was a real bastion of strength. And especially during war, coming home and putting the face on who you're fighting for is huge.
There's a price that we have paid in blood to try to counter the terrorism and prevent that from coming over here again. Those soldiers had families right here in our own counties, right around Richmond and all over Virginia, and they lost a loved one. So I think it's easy to forget that, and I would just remind all Virginians that that we have paid that price.
For all the Gold Star families and their loved ones, we just want to say thank you. And that's all we can do, say thank you. And it is really important that folks continue to understand the freedoms that we have can be very fragile, but and it takes hard work and sacrifice and selfless service and all these things that are in the values of your military just can't be the words. You really have to live them out in day-to-day actions.
We are certainly not without our flaws, our country, but I do believe that we're the only country who gives the people the ability to correct those flaws. But it takes tolerance, it takes respect for one another, and determination to do the right thing. So I think first and foremost, you need to do that, achieve that kind of understanding, and be committed to defending those principles at all costs, because they are worth it.
I mean, when you look at it, we have 19 folks that committed a horrible act that has completely changed this country forever.
We shifted, I believe, in September 11, 2001, from a feeling of safety to somewhat psychologically fragile, that someone can attack us through any means, and that these great borders north and south and these great oceans aren't as safe as we once thought they were.
There are ideologies out there of all types that if you latch onto them too closely and with too much blinders, it can generate such a hate, and it doesn't matter whether it's Islamic fundamentalism or a racial hatred. Those ideologies can be dangerous and lead to violence.
It's a pivotal point that people should know and understand. You don't need to be a historian, but I think you need to be aware of what happened, how it happened, our response to what happened, so they are aware if they see and understand those types of events happening in the future, what they can do.
And ultimately, for me as a veteran, my ultimate goal is that I'm part of a generation that inspires the next generation to serve in their own way.
America is the land of the free because of the brave, and it's the land of the free for the world. And that's a big obligation that we have to continue to work on every day and not take for granted.
I think it's important to know all the facts about September 11th and Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi freedom. But I think more important, it's the parable of September 11th and the lessons that we need to take away as a nation. What does it mean to be the most powerful nation on earth? How do we treat the global community? And so that, I think, is the main takeaway for young people. Not just the facts of the story, but the greater morality and lessons that can be taken away from the global war on terror.